Hi there, I'm Ken Thompson and welcome to my first video on my new course on high performing teams. I plan to do 6 or 7 modules, I haven't quite decided yet, to give a full coverage of the whole picture on high performing teams. So let's get started. What's all the fuss about high performing teams? Can it really be that difficult? I think it is. In this first video, I'm going to review the challenges of teams, how teams have evolved in quite a significant way over the last 15 to 20 years, and how you can go about creating teams that perform in the first place. So let's look at the challenges of teams, and as well as giving a little bit of introduction to myself, I've written 4 different books on different aspects of teams, and each book deals with a specific core problem of teams. So if you look at all 4 books together, you see some of the challenges in making a team work. The first book I wrote was Bioteams, which addresses almost problem number 1. The model of teams often used is command and control, which is often a single leader team. And whilst that is effective in some situations, it's generally not effective in most business situations today, where you rely totally on one person to give all the direction and all the leadership, and you don't use the talents of the other members of the team fully. So you need to think about your model of team, and if it's a single leader team, then it's probably not appropriate for the kind of teamwork you're going to need today. The second issue of teams is often we put too narrow borders and boundaries around our team. We define our team too tightly and too small, and we don't collaborate well with people who we decree are outside the team. And that means that when the team needs a favour, then it's not in a great place to get help from somebody else who's not within that core team. So the second important problem of teams is often we collaborate far too narrowly. The third problem of teams is how do you create a team that actually does perform and actually performs on an ongoing basis. And that was my more recent book on creating a high performing team. And finally, my very most recent book, Collaboration and Competition Within Organizations, addresses 2 myths about teams. The first myth is it's all going to be sweetness and light in your collaborative team and they will not be competing with each other. That is not the way it is. Competition within teams is normal and is actually quite healthy. The second myth is you cannot collaborate with your competitors either within the organization or outside the organization. So these are some of the problems we find when we try to make a team work. The command and control structure, drawing our boundaries too tightly, how do you actually get the performance you want from a team, and some of the realities of teamwork in terms of competition being an integral part of teamwork. So those are the challenges in having a team, and there's a number of other challenges as well. But the second challenge is that organizational teams are on the move. It's not a static target. They're continually changing year in, year out. And there's a number of things we're seeing. First of all, and I've alluded to it, the self-managed idea of teams. Books like The Starfish and the Spider and Ricardo Semler's writings and thoughts on teams, all about self-managed teams, self-organizing teams and collectively led teams. I prefer the idea of a collectively led team where there is leadership but it's distributed. Self-managed teams are a difficult thing to do. A second thing is intra and inter-organizational collaboration. Movements like Agile have created teams that have multi different disciplines, multi-professions in the team, and each of those professions brings their own culture. And things like collaborative supply chains and clusters and business networks have created the whole challenge of inter-organizational collaboration, where many organizations are actually virtual as an organization with lots of different parts, all of which are different legal entities. Social networks, we're all familiar with the LinkedIns, the Twitter, the Facebooks, and here we're starting to collaborate with hundreds of people, thousands of people, most of which we'll never meet, and collaborating in a very light touch way. Then we have virtual communities, which is trying to bring the disciplines and thinking of social networks inside the organization to make sure organizations can communicate better and exploit opportunities and share knowledge better. And the final thing that's really muddy in the water in teams is this whole movement towards virtual teams. And we can define a virtual team as a group of individuals who work across time, space, organizational and cultural boundaries, supported by tools and technologies. And this is a big movement at the minute towards the virtualization of teams. And if you look at the research and surveys on virtual teams, my take on it is, we've talked about it for an awful long time, but round about 2012, 2013, virtual teams actually started to kick in real time. We sort of passed the tipping point. And this is a survey very recently, April 2016, which tells us that 85% of respondents work in virtual teams. Many of these people also work in multiple teams, because when you work in a virtual team, you can spread yourself quite thin. That's called leverage, and that's one of the reasons why organizations are doing it. Almost half of the people in the survey reported that 50% of their teams include members of other cultures, and that is a really big challenge. 41% actually report that their virtual teams never meet in person. And that's a big issue, because when you don't meet in person as a team, generally it's much more easy to let people down. That's why people, if they want to tell a lie or be economic with the truth, prefer to do it over the phone. So that's a challenge when teams never meet in person. We'll talk more about that later on in the course. But the other interesting thing is it's getting more and more diverse every year. More geographical distribution, more cultural diversity, more cross-disciplinary focus, and gender diversity. So everybody's moving at quite a pace towards virtual teams. Well, not exactly everybody. For example, quite recently, IBM came out with a directive suggesting that their workforce should try to come back to the office a lot more. They didn't quite ban virtual teams, but have nearly got there. And one of the issues for them, they're saying, is when everybody's working virtually, you miss opportunities for serendipity. You know, people aren't in the office bumping in, having a coffee, talking about a problem somebody overhearing. So they believe that too much virtualization reduces the opportunity for information and serendipity, which is quite true, but that's also only the case if you do it badly. So virtual teams are getting bigger and bigger, and if you're not already dealing with them, you will have to deal with them. And virtual teams bring a number of benefits, which we'll talk about later, but they make teams even harder to do. They don't make anything any way easier for you. So I'm going to offer you a little model to help you think about virtual teams. I call it the Martini model. Martini is anytime, any place, anywhere. And there's 4 quadrants. So a team can be a same time, same place team. It can be a same time, any place team. It can be an anytime, same place team. And then the most virtual and distributed of the lot, anytime, any place. And if we start in the bottom left, traditional teams have been in the same time, same place. We're in the same room, the same building at the same time. And we've difficulties enough with these kind of teams as they are. If we draw a horizontal line across the diagram, Below the line, we're still in the same place. Above the line, we're in any place. So above the line, we have the virtual team zone. Below the line, we have the co-located team zone. And if we look in the rightmost quadrant, this is a type of team that doesn't get much talked about, but is actually used quite a lot. It's any time in the same place. And if you think about it, this could be a shift team where there's a shift and they all work and they go off and another shift comes in. It can be job sharing. And this needs a certain form of teamwork support. And it does need technology. The technology can be just a board on the room you're all coming into. When you check in, you see where the last team have left things. It could also be technology enabled as well. So let's look above the line as we go into the true virtual team zone. On the left hand side, we have same time, any place. So in this type of virtual team, you're distributed, but you're all there generally through the working day together. And that means you can have meetings. You can't have face-to-face meetings, but you can have virtual meetings. You can look in each other's eyes using technologies like Skype and WebEx and Adobe Connect. But if we go to the right-hand side, the top right quadrant, this is the most difficult form of virtual team. You're in different places, and you're also in different time zones. And this creates a lot of benefits. For example, what they call follow the sun working, where your team can effectively be working because it's distributed across the time zones on a continual basis. But technology wise, it's a little more difficult because there may be only some overlap in the working days. So we're talking about here where you're in the non-overlap period of the working days. And for technology, you need to then really think about asynchronous communications. You can't do it in real time. You need to use your email, you need to use your workflow software, and you need to use your virtual project rooms. So let's look a little bit more at the non-technology issues that are above the line in the virtual team zone. The first issue is the people who are remote from you may be in a different environment. And that means a couple of things. First of all, they may be distracted by requests from their managers. Their managers might be putting all sorts of pressure on them that you don't know about, taking them away from the activities in your team. They can also, as I mentioned before, be in multiple teams. So they may be unresponsive at certain times because there's other pressures on them and you don't realize what those pressures are. Another factor, which is a really big one, which we will talk about quite a lot later in the course, is culture. And there's three different aspects of culture I want to think about. First of all, the national culture, and we're going to look at different models for national culture, and this can cause real problems in virtual teams. The second thing is, if it's a cross organization, you can have different organizational cultures fighting with each other. And finally, you can have different professional cultures. If you've ever tried to organize meetings between marketing people and engineers, you'll understand some of the difficulties in that third type of culture. So obviously some of those issues can also apply when you're all in the same building as well, as I'm sure you well know. So we've looked at some of the challenges in running effective teams. We've looked at this whole problem of virtualization, and I've given you a little model that can help you think about virtual teams, which we'll go into in a bit more detail in another one of the videos. Let's cut to the chase a bit and say, well, how do we create teams that actually are high performing? And one of the exercises I do with people, I say to them, let's imagine you've been given the task of creating a high-performing team. What would you actually do? And I give people a few minutes to write down 2 or 3 things that they would do. So maybe just take a minute just to think if you were asked to create high performance in a group of people, what would be the obvious things, the top 3 that would be on your list? So you might have put down improve the meeting practices, for example, or you might have put down I need to get this difficult individual some training or deal with why they're not motivated. So those are the kind of things you might have thought about. And what I generally then ask people is this question: is the creation of a high-performing team a change management project or a process development project? And the answer is, it's a good Irish question, because the answer is yes. It's both of these things, and you have to do both at the same time. And it's interesting that each of us, I believe, has a different bias and a different blind spot. For example, I'm more a process development person than a change management person. So if you ask me to identify what needs to be done, I will generally come up with process steps, whereas somebody else might come up with change management steps. So this is vital, that you understand that when you're setting up a high-performing team successfully, you need to do both of these at the same time. So if you just do the change management side and get everybody all excited about being in the team, but you don't fix their processes, and for example you have terrible meetings, you'll drain all the energy and enthusiasm you created on the change management side. If you just start defining processes for meetings, processes for decisions, process for this and that, without actually getting people on board, you will have a very sterile process development project, and you'll not create high performance out of that as well. So what I'm going to offer you now is another model, a bit like the Martini model, and this one we're also going to develop in a lot more detail in subsequent videos. And this is my integrated model for creating a high-performing team. On the left-hand side of the model we have the process development work, and on the right-hand side we have the change management work. And if we look first of all at the process development work, there's 4 main areas that are absolutely vital: communications processes, meetings processes, alignment and accountability processes, and support processes. You need to address these, and each of these break down into 4 lower levels, which I'll explore a bit later on. I'll also suggest a very useful tool for doing this, because one of the things you need to do first of all is a process health check. You need to talk with the team members and establish which parts of the process are working fine and which parts are broken or absent. So it's not one size fits all. You need to start with a health check. You also then need to set some priorities. Some processes are more important than others, and you need to fix those first. And we'll talk a lot more about that later. So that's the process side of setting up the team. The second side is the change management side. That's working with every individual who's going to be on that team, and it's a pretty much classic change management approach. It starts from getting insight and building a relationship with an individual, gaining understanding of what's important to them and how they're thinking and influencing them, and then seeking their commitment. You really want to get your team members committed to the team and committed to playing some sort of leadership support role in the team, so that it's really a collectively led team. And finally, if you ask people to commit to these kind of roles, you need to come in and support them. Now these two go together. It's like a car and the racing driver, or a train and the track. You can't do one without the other. The process development work will underpin everything you do on change management, and the change management will enhance everything you do on process development. So that's our model. We're going to explore it in a lot more detail in subsequent videos. So the second video, we're going to really hit the ground running. One of the questions I get asked over and over again is, I've got a bunch of people and I need to make them a team by tomorrow. How do you go about doing that? So I'm going to share with you some techniques a process and some learnings from disciplines such as game-based learning for how you can create an effective team very quickly indeed.